Why is the suffix ition always pronounced with a short I? This is an excellent question, and one that I've been rehearsing answering for weeks now. In order to even explain why it is a question at all, though, I need to take you, gentle reader, on an excursus into Middle English and Anglo-Latin, and explain why ition is pronounced with a short I by explaining why nation is pronounced with a long A. This answer will be using the IPA unapologetically, by the way. I've answered questions on the evolution of English pronunciation with phonetics before, but I find it too offensive to endure. For those not so fortunate as to have memorized the IPA in their tender years, I am doing a video version of this answer attached at the bottom. Like most worthwhile questions in life, the answers to this lie in that most excellent Wikipedia page, the traditional English pronunciation of Latin. That page is quite dense, though, and low on explanation, so I'm taking this at a leisurely pace. The year is 1200. The Norman conquest is complete, and the literary culture of the Anglo-Saxons has been supplanted by people writing in French, or people starting to write English again with French spelling. The pronunciation of Latin words is pretty much Franco-Latin, because French is now the language of culture. And English lives in a more innocent time, a time before the great English vowel shift and the myriad adventures of the yod, a time when the spelling of English, even though it is reset to follow French conventions, still basically makes sense. And for Latin words in particular, Anglo-Latin follows a set of rules that is a little eccentric if you're visiting in a time machine from ancient Latium, but that is coherent. Words in Anglo-Latin are stressed in the same place as they were in Latin. Anglo-Latin has long and short vowels, just like Latin had long and short vowels. Anglo-Latin does not have its long and short vowels in the same places as Latin did, though. Instead, it has distributed them in a pattern that is easy to learn, even if it is ahistorical. The bits that are relevant to our story oversimplifying are: an unstressed vowel is short, a stressed vowel on the third last syllable, the antepenult, is short, so camera, camera. A stressed vowel on the second last syllable, the penult, is short or long, depending on how many consonants follow it. If two or more consonants follow it, it is called a closed syllable, and it is short. Factor. Vector. If one or zero consonants follow it, on the other hand, it is called an open syllable, and it is long. Crater. Pathos. Those are the default rules that apply to Latin-derived words in English to this day. The rules have gotten messed up with language, stress shifts, analogy, and randomness. I have no idea, for example, why it's drama and not drama, as the rules would predict. The added complication historically is the Great English vowel shift. To make sense of how Anglo-Latin works, it helps to go back to before the Great English vowel shift, back when a long A was actually an A and not an A, and a long I was an E and not an I. So camera was camera, and factor was factor. But crater was pronounced crater. It had a long A, which is actually pronounced as a long version of a short A, crater. So back in those more innocent times, say 1200, the word nation was pronounced a lot closer to how it was spelled. The only main difference was that in front of an I, T was pronounced as T. This is a change that happened in late Latin, and it was, as a result, taken up throughout Europe. So Italian has nazione, Romanian has nazione, German has nation. Now, classical Latin natio has a long A and a long O. In early Anglo-Latin, the A in natio was actually short. natio, because it is stressed in the third last syllable. And the O is short because it is unstressed. So nation was pronounced in 1200 Anglo-Latin as nation. 3 syllables. Nation. In the same way, deletion was pronounced deletion. Motion was motion. Contribution was originally contribution. And the E is something that I'll come back to later. And petition was petition. They're all short vowels. And then the first of a long list of changes happened to the pronunciation of Anglo-Latin. If an I was followed by another vowel, its pronunciation was shortened to Y, something we term a semi-vowel. And we can write that instead of IPAJ as an I with a brave underneath to make its relation to E more explicit. So nation, 3 syllables, turned into nation, 2 syllables. Nation, nation. And when that happened, it set off a reaction elsewhere in the word. One of the frequent changes in historical linguistics is something called compensatory lengthening. If a letter in a word becomes shorter or drops off, the word overall takes less time to say. This instinctively bothers people who are used to saying the word as a certain length, and there is a common tendency to lengthen another part of the same word so that the word overall still takes as long to say. That's not a universal rule across languages and language changes. No sound change in language is, but it is quite common. For an example, more recently in English, take the dropping of R in Commonwealth English. American English uses the older pronunciation of car, car. When England English dropped the R, the preceding vowel was lengthened. The R drops off from car. The result is not ka, it's car. Car. Takes as long to say as car. So when E in Anglo-Latin became a semi-vowel, yeah, the preceding vowel became long for the same reason. Nation became nation, became nation, nation. And the A in nation became long for 2 reasons. First, it was now a stressed open penult syllable, just like krater. But second, even if it wasn't a stressed open penult syllable, any vowel in front of a semivowel became long anyway. We can see that in the pronunciation of Ethiopia, Ethiopia in modern English. The early Anglo-Latin pronunciation of the word was Ethiopia, with all vowels short. That's what the rules of Anglo-Latin predict. The fact that the initial vowel was a diphthong in Latin, Ethiopia, is irrelevant to that. The AE was treated just like an E was in Anglo-Latin, which is why Aeschylus has an initial short E, even if it's spelt with an AE. Aeschylus. Ethiopia. But with compensatory lengthening in play, Ethiopia, 5 syllables, became Ethiopia, 3 syllables, and in turn that became Ethiopia. The O is long in Ethiopia because of compensatory lengthening, but it's also long because it is now a stressed open penult. It's in that same position as crater. But the initial E in Ethiopia, Ethiopia, is long only because of compensatory lengthening. Unlike in Aeschylus, that E shouldn't be long. It is long because it's followed by a Y. And with a great English vowel shift, Ethiopia became Ethiopia. You may notice that Ethiopia isn't pronounced like that anymore. Those semivowels are now gone, and the pronunciation is back to 5 syllables, Ethiopia. That was a change that happened in the 19th century in the teaching of Latin, undoing sound changes and trying to make the pronunciation of Anglo-Latin closer to the original. Never mind the whole Great English vowel shift, there was only so much unrolling sound changes they felt they could do. So, we have seen early Anglo-Latin nation turned into nation with a long A. And it's the length of the vowel before the tion suffix that we're concentrating on here. The remainder follows from other language changes in English. So we have nation, that goes to nation, as English and French both softened the t sound into s. That is reflected in the modern French pronunciation, nation. Nation goes to nation, as English reduced unstressed vowels to schwas. Nation. Nation goes to nation, when in around 1500, English palatalized sye to sh. The y sound, the yod, as linguists call it so they don't go around saying y all the time, is something of a time bomb in languages. It often changes the pronunciation of consonants before it. Sye to sh, for example. This happens to different extents in different languages, in different dialects of English, but in the suffix tion, the change is universal. It's always shin. Nation goes to nation as a result of the Great English vowel shift, which rotated the pronunciation of all long vowels in English. And that's how nation is still pronounced in Scottish English. And nation becomes nation with the diphthong pronunciation of long A, which is applicable to most dialects of English, which dates from the 18th century. I'm fairly sure, by the way, I got the relative ordering of at least some of these sound changes wrong, but that doesn't impact the argument. So, the A is always long in front of the tion suffix in English, because of that instance of compensatory lengthening earlier on, when tion turned into tion. And the same applies if there is an E or an O in front of the suffix tion. So, deletion, short E, following the rules of early Anglo-Latin. Deletion, 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 long E, that's compensatory lengthening. Deletion, 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 deletion. English vowel shift. Similarly, motion, or the short O. Motion, 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 long O, compensatory lengthening. Motion, 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 motion. Now the sound U does not follow the pattern of A, E, and O before tion. That's because U in Anglo-Latin was not a long or a short vowel. And that's because Anglo-Latin started as Franco-Latin, and in Franco-Latin, U was pronounced as U. So contribution was contribution in Franco-Latin, just as it is contribution, contribution in modern French. Now, Old English did have an U sound. King in Old English was König. But Middle English did not have an U sound. And faced with a now unfamiliar French sound U, Middle English resorted to a common approximation. When languages have to deal with an unfamiliar U sound, they rendered it as U. So contribution in Anglo-Latin became contribution, using the U pronunciation in open syllables. Closed syllables used an pronunciation instead. Combustion. And contribution underwent the changes we have already seen for other words ending in tion, except for the compensatory lengthening in the Great English vowel shift. Neither of those changes applied to U, because U is not a short or a long vowel, it is a diphthong. So the U in contribution, now contribution, has not changed its pronunciation since 1200. Different dialects of English do different things with a Y of ition, as I've already alluded to with a shift from sye to sh. So tuition That word is tuition in England English, tuition in American English, and tuition in Australian English. But we've digressed enough already. And now at long last, we come to the question I'm actually supposed to be answering here. Why is the suffix ition always pronounced with a short I? We saw that the U in ition does not undergo the changes that A, E, or O did in that context, because it's not a single vowel, it's a diphthong. But the I in ition is a single vowel, and E does become a long vowel in Anglo-Latin in the expected position of an open penult. Item, iris, horizon. So we would expect the E in petition to have followed the pattern of the A, E, and O in nation, delation, and motion. Those three words now have long vowels because of compensatory lengthening. And we would expect I, not E at the time, to have undergone the same process. Petition, 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 and with a great English vowel shift, petition, petition. But that has not happened. It's petition, not petition. The compensatory lengthening of I in front of a semivowel has never happened in English. The I in petition is as short now as it was in 1200. In fact, that applies quite generally in Anglo-Latin. It's trivia, not trivia. Delirium, not delirium. Militia, not militia. So why did it not happen? I did not look up the answer, but I'm arrogant enough not to. Think back to 1200. The I has just become a semivowel. So you have petition, change into petition. And that semivowel yeah is just a quick version of an E as far as you're concerned. It can still be transcribed phonetically as an E with a brave underneath. Petition. So there's an E in front of the TS and a half an E after the TS. Petition. If we now introduce compensatory lengthening to petition, we get petition. And if you translate it like I have just then in IPA with I with a colon and J afterwards, nothing looks unusual. But if you break it up with a long I counting as two short I's and with the semivowels written as an I with a brave, you end up with it mentally being represented as I, TS, I brave. Two I's in front of the T, petition, and half an I after it. People tend to avoid saying too many of the same sound in a row. And they address that by changing one of the sounds, what phonetics calls dissimilation. So, for example, we pronounce berserk as berserk, dropping the first of two R's. My guess is that Middle English speakers were confronted with the prospect of saying 2.5 I's in a row in words like petition, trivia, delirium, militia, and they balked. It sounded too repetitive, too Swedish chef, if you like, to them. And so they resisted applying that change to E in that context. And because the E did not lengthen in Middle English as compensatory lengthening before a semivowel, it did not get to undergo the Great English vowel shift when that took place. Here endeth the lesson.